On this Saturday night, close call at sea. A global news crew bearing witness to a near catastrophic collision between U.S. and Chinese warships, labeled intentional.
The fact that this was announced over the radio prior to doing it.
Our Mackenzie Gray brings us an exclusive report from the South Shina Sea. Also tonight, the helping hand from above.
This is not a heavy downpour that runs off and disappears.
Bringing relief to Nova Scotia's firefight. The sextortion crisis hitting Canadian high schools.
I don't think anyone's safe. Pictures get altered. It could be a different person with a different face, different body. It looks like they're doing something completely different.
The proposed federal crackdown and provincial push to stop it. And a daring descent on Mount Everest. The rescue and escape from the mountain's death zone.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you, and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with an exclusive report from one of the most contentious waterways in the world, the South China Sea. Our global news crew has been traveling with the Canadian Navy and earlier today witnessed firsthand the latest aggressive move by Beijing, appearing to intentionally target a U.S. vessel, escalating tensions between these two global superpowers. The dangerous maneuver happened in the Taiwan Strait, where HMCS Montreal has been traveling, part of Operation Projection, a joint military mission between Canada and the U.S. Our camera captured this Chinese warship picking up speed before cutting in front and nearly colliding with the bridge wing of the U.S. destroyer. Our Mackenzie Gray is aboard the Canadian frigate, and he saw it all happen in front of him. Mackenzie.
Farah, we've just completed an 18-hour journey of the Taiwan Strait here on HMCS Montreal, and we were joined by an American destroyer that had a close encounter with a Chinese warship.
Our trip through the most politically charged waters in the world started off as anticlimactic. The only thing visible were the calm seas, but we did know there was a friend close by.
When the Navy travels through this part of the world, they're generally accompanied by allied ship. Right here is a U.S. warship that will be traveling with the Montreal through the Taiwan Strait.
That ship, USS Chung Hoon. It's been with the Montreal the past few days, but so have Chinese warships, shadowing the rare joint U.S.-Canada mission in the South China Sea, but from a distance. Once the fog cleared in the Taiwan Strait, we shot this video of one of the Chinese ships stepping up their aggression, picking up considerable steam coming in from the left, telling the Chung Hoon over the radio to move or there'd be a collision. The Americans told the Chinese to stay clear of their ship, but ultimately they were cut off and needed to slow down to avoid getting hit. The two ships missing each other by only 150 yards.
When you're in big warships maneuvering close to each other, 150 yards is very scary. And you don't ever want to be that close to another vessel because too many things can go wrong and you can actually have a collision.
That's HMCS Montreal Commander Paul Mountford. He watched the incident and believes the Chinese broke international maritime regulations and acted unprofessionally.
The fact that this was announced over the radio prior to doing it clearly indicated that it was intentional.
The Chinese ships didn't attempt a similar maneuver on the Montreal, but did get within 1,000 yards of the ship.
I'm hoping that that was an isolated incident that won't happen again for us because we have international law on our side. This is international waters.
As the day moved on, so did the Chinese, drifting further and further away from the Canadian and U.S. ships as they continued their course right through the contested waters.
The Montreal has now left the Taiwan Strait, but Chinese warships are still shadowing it. But it's the near collision with the U.S. warship, Farah, that could have done real damage to the China-U.S. relationship.
Mackenzie Gray aboard HMCS Montreal for us tonight. Thank you for your coverage, Mackenzie. And what Mackenzie just showed us is not an isolated incident. In fact, the Pentagon says there's been an alarming increase of aggressive intercepts by Chinese military aircraft and vessels in the disputed region, including on Friday last week when a Chinese fighter jet flew in front of a U.S. reconnaissance plane. Beijing is building and fortifying artificial islands and is able to deploy its military at a moment's notice. Canada's Defence Minister Anita Anand is in Singapore for a top security summit and today revealed that Canada will boost its military presence in the region. David Akin reports.
At a security summit in Singapore, Canada's Defence Minister Anita Anand was meeting with her counterparts from around the world. The topic of the day, China.
Canada always seeks coexistence and collaboration. We will challenge China where we ought to. We will cooperate with China to find solutions on global issues.
But almost at the same time, an incident in the Taiwan Strait caught by a global news television crew. It's the latest in a series of provocative acts by the Chinese military.
Basically, they're bullying and provoking reactions to say that these are their waters and that we shouldn't be there.
Anand spoke to Global News about the incident later in the day.
Canada will continue to sail where international law allows, including the Strait, the South China Sea, and really our overall goal is to increase the peace and stability of this region. And that's why we are going to continue to see more of Canada in this region as set out in our Indo-Pacific strategy.
At the summit, Anand announced Canada will increase its naval presence in the Pacific, sending 2 rather than 1 Navy frigate on an annual deployment in the region. Those at the Singapore summit had hoped that top U.S. and Chinese defense officials could find a way to de-escalate tensions in the region. But the U.S. said that China refused to talk. A brief handshake at dinner was all that could be managed.
A cordial handshake over dinner is no substitute for a substantive engagement. And the more that we talk, the more we can avoid the misunderstandings and miscalculations that could lead to crisis or conflict.
The Chinese said the Americans were to blame. This is because of a series of erroneous actions and words made by the U.S. side, this Chinese general said. Australia's Prime Minister warned of the consequences of this breakdown in dialogue.
The consequences of such a breakdown, whether in the Taiwan Strait or elsewhere, would not be confined to the big powers or the site of their conflict. They would be devastating for the world.
David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
Search crews are still working to find survivors after India's worst rail disaster in more than 2 decades. The death toll has now reached 300 people, with another 1,000 among the injured. A preliminary report shows the crash happened because of a signal failure. Some of the mangled train cars have now been cleared and taken away by cranes. Finally, some relief. Rain is offering a helping hand for those fighting wildfires in Nova Scotia. And there's even more good news for those in the Halifax-area. The fire there is no longer deemed out of control. Our Mike Armstrong has been covering the fires all week and joins us in what looks like much-needed rain, Mike.
In normal times, a rainy weekend isn't something people look forward to, but for much of Nova Scotia right now, this is very much not normal times. This weather is welcome. For the crews fighting fires, it isn't just that there is rain, it's the type of rain. Basically, it's exactly what they need.
This is excellent. This is not a heavy downpour that runs off and disappears. This will soak into the ground more effectively.
The reason that's important is how the fire hides. In the Tantalin wildfire, for the last few days, crews haven't been dealing with big flames. It's been mostly about searching for hot spots on the ground, meter by meter.
Today's going to be probably an uncomfortable day for people out there. They're going to be digging, they're going to be moving logs, they're going to be in the black, and it's going to be real messy.
Now, some areas of the evacuation zone have been reopened. Residents in the green areas of this map are now allowed home. What that's meant for many is going back to houses that had no power for days. People are having to empty fridges and freezers.
Busy day, but you know what? We're the lucky ones.
That perspective was something heard often Saturday, but 150 homes in Upper Tantalin were destroyed. Residents returning home know they're lucky to have a home to return to.
It was great to get back. We were just thankful that things weren't a whole lot worse. All we lost was food, and compared to what other people have lost, that's nothing.
The rain is lifting spirits.
Nova Scotia's premier spent the day in the southwestern part of the province, a region where firefighters are still battling what he calls the biggest fire in provincial history. The Barrington Lake fire covers more than 23,000 hectares and is still considered out of control. About 50 homes have been lost. All new firefighting resources headed to the province are being deployed to that region. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Upper Tantallon, Nova Scotia.
Tragedy in Quebec. 4 children have died and 1 person is missing after a fishing trip gone wrong on the shores of the St. Lawrence River. The children were initially found unresponsive hours after an overnight 911 call in Pont-Neuf-sur-Mer, where a group fishing on the riverbank was caught by a rising tide. They were taken to a nearby health center and were later pronounced dead. Search efforts are now underway for the missing man in his 30s. 6 other people were rescued from the water. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is urging NDP leader Jagmeet Singh to pull out of the NDP Liberal Confidence and Supply Agreement, hoping to trigger an election over the Prime Minister's refusal to call a public inquiry into foreign interference. But Singh says that won't solve the problem. For the West Bloc, Mercedes Stephenson sat down with him and NDP MP Jenny Kwan.
You will not hold them accountable. You will not put an election on the table as a possibility. Aren't you kind of handcuffing yourself there?
Well, not at all, because we can still raise the concerns. We can still raise the issues in public.
But there's no real consequence for them at the end of the day.
Well, the consequence of an election would undermine, if my true goal is to defend democracy, it would be illogical to say I'm concerned about our democracy being influenced by foreign governments, so I'm going to trigger an election. That doesn't actually fit together logically. If someone is self-serving like Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Blanchet, who just wants an election and is looking for an excuse, then I would understand that argument. But I actually genuinely want to see the full extent of what's going on with interference. I want to see some steps taken, some measures taken to defend our democracy. And that would be, I think, the consistent approach if one really cares about defending our institutions, our democracy, and making sure we're free from interference.
I want to come back to the idea of the election in just a moment, but I want to ask you, Ms. Kwan, when you're hearing from the Chinese-Canadian community, what is their reaction to how this is all unfolding in Ottawa, and whether they feel that their concerns are being heard?
Well, the community members that I'm talking to, of course, are deeply concerned with what's going on. Some of them, I think, are also being targeted. Already, we're seeing the chilling effect of this. I've attended rallies, for example, in support of Hong Kong, to stand with the people of Hong Kong with the unbelievable situation that they are faced with the national security law. And some of them are afraid to speak up. Some of them come to these rallies and they're wearing masks, even though we don't need to wear a mask anymore. And not for health purposes, but they're wearing a mask to protect their identity. Some of them have family members in Hong Kong or in China, and they are so worried about them. So their fear is very real, and I see that and I fully recognize it, which is why it is so important for us to not be silenced, for us to step up and to be that voice and to carry their voice into the House of Commons.
And you can hear more of Mercedes' conversation with the NDP leader and Vancouver MP Jenny Kwan tomorrow on the West Bloc. In a photoshopped world, anyone can be a victim. The scary scam of sextortion. Coming up, the brave BC teens raising their voices and calling for action. In an age when technology can put anyone's face on anyone's body, there are growing calls for accountability from big tech companies and major pornography sites in non-consensual intimate image sharing. Politicians say they're taking action, but some of the younger people being targeted online say the problem's only getting worse. Neetu Gurcha reports.
It's like it's your fault, you should have known better. But how are you supposed to know if you never learned about it?
These BC high school students are calling for more education and resources to prevent and deal with online harassment and sextortion.
This is something that happens really at a young age. We should talk about it, spread awareness.
I don't think anyone's safe. Through all different types of social media, pictures get altered, they get taken out of context. A lot of editing now, it could be a different person with a different face, different body. It looks like they're doing something completely different.
More and more often, they say they're hearing cases of their peers being targeted and falling victim.
I think most of the cases, they've never met that person before in person. They just add them on Snapchat, Instagram, and start talking to them.
This teacher says in a recent case, a female student shared intimate images with someone she thought was her boyfriend. It wasn't, and the stranger blackmailed her.
I investigated and started calling saying, why are you not showing up to school and what's going on? And she was so intimidated, she wouldn't leave her house.
How often are you directly hearing from students about this?
I received 3 to 4 complaints a week, personally, that I dealt with.
It's why she says she recently helped form a committee of teachers to support victimized youth.
Tonight, what we're going to be talking about is sexting, nudes, and intimate images.
Brandon Lohr broadcasts live to parents and educators. He's the CEO of a company dedicated to providing digital literacy and internet safety education.
This is a financial strategy that hackers and scammers use. So it's more, they're doing it not because it's for sexual gratification, because they're trying to get money out of people.
He hopes help cracking down on those committing the crimes will come from a proposed federal bill, S-12, seeking to make Supreme Court mandated changes to who's automatically signed up for the National Sex Offender Registry, and through BC's new law around removing non-consensual intimate images online.
The meeting, I've had 3 so far. One was Google, Microsoft, and the one most recently was with the company that holds Pornhub, MeetGeek. And what I heard from them was a commitment to work and abide by our legislation, and we'll be continuing to hold them to account and other companies out there.
BC's government hopes focusing on accountability from the big actors will help set a safer industry-wide standard. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Surrey, BC.
Ahead, State Farm leaving homeowners in the U.S. in a state of uncertainty. How climate change is changing and halting insurance policies. California's 2-decade-long mega drought, combined with massive wildfires and record flooding, have caused one of the largest insurance companies in the U.S. to make a drastic decision. State Farm will no longer provide insurance to new homeowners in the state. As Jennifer Johnson reports, experts say this is becoming a disturbing new trend.
California is in a climate disaster crisis. Year after year, wildfires wipe out vast areas of the state. Over 15,000 wildfires in the past 2 years. And now, weather whiplash as the state suffers from record-breaking rainfall causing catastrophic flooding.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
But now State Farm won't be there. The state's largest homeowner insurer has just announced it will no longer provide coverage for new homeowners in California, citing the state's rapidly growing catastrophe atmosphere.
It didn't surprise me, but it's unfortunate.
And it's not just California. Across the country, insurers are dropping policies for people in several disaster-prone states like Florida, Texas, and Louisiana, where hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, and wildfires are costing these companies billions of dollars each year.
Well, I think it's very troubling, and I think it could be part of a trend.
State Farm says it has to protect its financial health as disasters add up in California. Climate change experts fear denying or cutting homeowners' coverage could become the new normal for insurers in the U.S., Canada, and other countries as the Earth heats up.
What we know very clearly from years of scientific research is that the frequency and intensity of extreme events is increasing. It's increasing here in California. It's increasing in other parts of the U.S. and other parts of the world.
In the first quarter of 2023, global insurance companies lost over $15 billion in claims from weather disasters. Experts predict millions of existing California homeowners will be sent jaw-dropping high rate hikes or could lose their policies too.
Unfortunately, the law is the insurance companies have the right, as long as they give you 75 days notice, when your policy comes up for renewal, they can tell you, we're not going to issue you a new policy.
Homeowners who have lost their coverage can purchase a policy from California's FAIR Plan, a high-risk insurance pool established under state law. But its coverage is limited and it's very expensive. Unfortunately for millions, it could be their only alternative, other than moving out of the state. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Next, the big business of Mount Everest, 70 years after the first climb. Sherpas speak out on the tallest mountain turned commercial asset. Many people have a dream of climbing Mount Everest, but it's an extremely risky challenge for those who try. In fact, just last week, Vancouver doctor Peter Swart died while descending from Camp 4. But among the heartbreak, there is also heroism. As Mike Derole tells us, the latest tale involves a Sherpa who saved a climber's life in an area known as the death zone.
By the harsh rules of Mount Everest, George Sherpa could have left the Malaysian climber shivering uncontrollably to die. In the so-called death zone, rescues put everyone at risk and are considered rare, if not impossible. But the 30-year-old refused to walk by, convinced his client to give up his ascent, and hauled the man down 600 meters over 6 hours. In places where it was rockier, we couldn't drag him, so we had to carry him on our backs, he said. His heroics kept the number of climbers who have died this year on Everest at 12, with another 5 still missing, making it the deadliest climbing season in 8 years. The rescue came at the right time, as celebrations echoed across Nepal to mark the 70th anniversary of the first ever ascent by Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay.
Just 35 miles from Kathmandu, capital of Nepal, Hillary and Tenzing were welcomed and congratulated by their fellow members of the expedition.
Over 6,300 people have since reached the peak of the world's highest mountain, including nearly 130 Canadians. Laurie Skreslet of Calgary was the first Canadian to stand atop Everest in 1982. But all those climbers would no doubt marvel at the greatness of this man.
This is Everest summit, May 23rd, my 28th summit Everest.
Cami Rita recently set the record for most ascents at 28. The Sherpa, his face blackened by wind and snow burns, was celebrated in a series of official ceremonies. But the 53-year-old is highly critical of the way Nepal benefited from Everest, which contributes 4% to the country's economy. Permit fees alone for Everest totaled over $5 million this year. But the Sherpas who followed in the steps of Tenzing Norgay have seen little of that money, leading Rita to suggest he's going to immigrate to the United States. There's no future in Nepal, he says, so why are we sitting here? Everything about Everest is big, the mountain, the heroics, and the business surrounding it. Mike Drolet, Global News.
And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Nanaimo, British Columbia. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.